Investors are going to be closely watching President Trump's meeting with China's President Xi Jinping later this week during the G20 in Osaka, Japan. Can the two leaders move the ball forward and reach a trade deal? Well, the CEO of FedEx weighed in on Special Report.
We believe that the international situation will resolve itself, hopefully, maybe as early as this weekend with President Trump. All 440 or 50,000 FedExers are one way or another involved in international trade, so it's in everybody's best interest, hopefully, to resolve these issues and get back to open markets.
Well, let's bring in Scott Ladner, Chief Investment Officer at Horizon Investments, and James Roberts, Research Fellow for Economic Freedom and Growth at the Heritage Foundation. Guys, good morning.
Good morning, Cheryl. Good to be with you.
Scott, first to you. We mentioned this at the top of the show, but FedEx has now filed a lawsuit against the Commerce Department, basically saying we are not the enforcer when it comes to what can and cannot be shipped overseas, and that in particular is over the Huawei issue and U.S. suppliers not shipping components over to Huawei. That was the broader interview topic. But what did you make of his comments about a possible trade deal and that we really need to kind of get out of this with China and figure this out?
Well, and we would definitely agree with Mr. Smith. It is in both parties' best interest to get something done at this meeting. We do think it's setting up as a little bit of a Superman moment between Trump and President Xi himself. But it is, both parties have a lot to gain by getting something done. The U.S. can get materially better terms of trade with an emerging superpower and have a lot better planning and medium-term capex expectations for its companies.
Yeah.
And China can get some certainty around what's going forward with their economy and stop, kind of cut back on some of the stimulus measures that they've had to put in place over the last 12 months.
That's a good point, because that's been a big pressure campaign that we don't talk about enough. I'm glad you brought that up, that the Chinese economy can and will suffer more if something isn't figured out. And James, I want to ask you about the G20 as things get underway. There is going to be some early discussions with Lighthizer and his counterparts in China. And then again, this Saturday meeting we're expecting, we hope, at least at this point, between China's president and President Trump. Do you think that we can at least get the blueprint back on the table of a deal? Where are we at diplomatically, in your opinion?
I think the impasse on trade and other issues between the U.S. and China is likely to continue at the G20, although there may be a face-saving agreement to continue negotiations before levying any additional tariffs. But really, it calls into question the value of this so-called G2 meeting that was elevated after the financial crisis in 2008. Of the four G20 countries, U.S., U.K., and Australia are the only ones in the top 20 of the Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom at heritage.org/index. Meanwhile, Americans don't need to be schooled on governance issues by the likes of China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. The international bureaucrats have morphed the G20 into a sort of international administrative state swamp that President Trump's been trying to drain.
So you don't sound optimistic then. Is that what I'm hearing here?
Well, I think it's going to be a continuation. These are very big issues. It has bipartisan support in the United States for taking a tougher line on China. Yeah. The Huawei thing is proceeding along a separate bilateral track of law enforcement and national security concerns. Sure. Certainly, it's going to be a lot of sticky wickets, and FedEx being caught in the middle is unhappy for them. But I don't think the world wants to have internet traffic going via Beijing in the future. Probably
not. Yeah, I think the 5G build-out needs to be safe and secure. I think we all can agree on that, Scott. But from an investment standpoint, look, what if this does play out over the long term and no deal is reached and these tariffs stay in place? Investors, we've had kind of a muted reaction from markets so far, but that's not going to last if we don't get some type of movement this weekend at G20.
No, we would definitely expect to see a pullback in equity markets globally if we don't get something a little bit more concrete, a little bit more of a roadmap towards kind of an exit strategy for this conflict. Do think that would be somewhat limited, though, because we have had the reemergence last week of basically global central bank policy becoming more coordinated really for the first time since Trump became elected president. That's an important backstop to markets right now and should not be discounted.
Yeah, well, look, and I don't want to discount the fact that we're having a great month of June when it comes to the Dow, the NASDAQ, and the S&P. Despite all of this, whether it's Iran or China, markets are looking real strong right now. And obviously, guys, we're looking for some semblance of something this weekend. Fox Business is going to be all over it. Scott, James, guys, thank you so much for getting up early. We always appreciate that.
Great to be with you.
Thank you, Cheryl.